So our consciousness that we have at our disposition can only perceive, a certain amount of conscious reality,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. But when we connect to a greater conscience or God, right, we can almost perceive their reality in the fourth or fifth or whatever
Yeah.
dimension they're
Hardcore
in, the
meditators.
realm that they're in.
Yeah, like transcendental meditation. People get hardcore into that, say that they can almost feel like connected to that.
So we think about the questions about how, Jesus came to fruition through a human being, right? In the third dimension, right? Let's say God lives in the fourth dimension and his kingdom, like you said, uh, is of a different realm, right? When he talks to Pilate, he says, my realm is of a different realm,
Yeah, my
you
my
know,
kingdom the kingdom of heaven is
my
a
kingdom,
different realm, right? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, different realm. And so, if we take that into consideration, it's just so mind-boggling, because if you do live in the fourth dimension, you can alter the third dimension, which
Yeah,
means that
that was another
a
thing I was
hu-
going to. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
you know Jesus can just be born out of a woman. I mean, the possibilities, because I mean,
mm,
we as
awesome.
Christians believe in God being, you know all knowing, all possible. And if everything's possible within God, then that means God can alter the third dimension because he does live outside of the
Yeah,
dimension.
yeah. I was gonna, because that was another thing
Turning the
I
sea,
was, because like,
making bread come down from heaven.
yeah, I was thinking about that too, because yeah, because think about it, if you're right, like if God is outside the fourth dimension, yeah, of course, that would explain a lot of the paradoxes and a lot of the miracles that our human brains can't understand. Because our third dimension, as we perceive it, has limitations, and so it's like, of course, God could turn water into wine, or I don't know, like see the future, right? Because He's outside time itself, so of course you're gonna see the future, or like the other miracles, right? Or even creating the world, creating a
Yeah,
universe. I mean, like you said, if he's outside the third dimension, he's controlling. Maybe that gives him control over the third, or maybe being outside the fourth dimension, being a fifth dimensional being, gives him control over the third dimension. You know, so that's
yeah,
weird. And I remember I told you at St. Mary's. Remember, like, how can you asked a question? I think, or I asked a question, like, why do we confess our sins out loud? Why do we need to pray out loud or pray with intention? And we came to like the thing, because I remember I was thinking, like, if God can see everything, like a fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional being, wouldn't they be able to see through 3D objects? Like we can see through this, because their perception is beyond our understanding. So maybe because on a map, you can see everything at once. So if you're seeing every 3D object at once as a fifth dimensional being, you should be able to see through the objects, right? Because we can see through everything on a map, right? So you should be
and
able to
even communicate to third dimensional beings.
yeah, communicate. And but the thing is, on this with prayer and confession or thoughts, it says in the Bible that God can read our thoughts or hear our thoughts, right? That there's nothing
Yeah,
private. That there's
no, yeah,
no
nothing can be kept away from
yeah,
God.
it was
Yeah,
something like that, right? It wasn't it like sins cannot be hidden, or like
yes,
will be revealed. Yeah. So like if he can see through 3D objects, he can see through our brain and see the neurons firing in certain patterns. And if he created us, then he knows the exact neuron firings that create specific thoughts, right? He can translate it like we translate anything. Like code on a computer can be translated into, he can understand what that means, and he knows what we're thinking, right? I mean, it just when you follow that logical, you know, it's crazy.
yeah,
So many
yeah, yeah,
possibilities.
yeah. Because it's almost like I associate it to how the computer age came about. Like programmers, they
Yeah.
programmed. They were the creators, just like God was the creator. But you can tell, oh man, this person wrote this code or this program. But you can tell, like, it's almost like an artistic style. Oh, this was made by Steele, or this was made by Jose, because this is how they type. And the programs that they created, the creator knows how they function,
Yeah,
and
read
stuff
it
like
like it's
that.
nothing.
They realize, oh, like this, there's a red alarm here, I need to fix that, and it's always trying to bring everything at balance within, the software and the computer world. And, I don't know too much about it to really go into depth about how that plays out, in correlation with the creation.
Mhm.
But, I just see, so many associations with it. Like it's really interesting.
Yeah, and then what we talked about earlier about, so Jesus did say, like, when Pilate asked him, like, where is your kingdom, and Jesus could have said anything, but he said, my kingdom of he said, my kingdom, and I think another translation, my kingdom of heaven, said, my kingdom is not of this realm. In certain translations use the word realm. I just think that's interesting because it says a dimension, within a dimension you have realms. So, like, is he saying his
Well, a dimension is a level of consciousness.
yeah, is a higher dimension.
Wait, hold
Saying,
up, bro.
basically saying his kingdom is of a higher dimension. I mean, you can't.
So
It's just there. It's right there in front of you, and he can't say it in scientific terms, like we said earlier, because no one at that science didn't even exist back then. He can't just start spitting out scientific terms. No one's gonna understand. And why would he? Jesus is not there to confuse people. You know,
yeah,
he's to make his intentions clear.
it's
And
so interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's just
Like, think about it. We just talked about in our podcast that, you know, two-dimensional beings can see linear space, or like,
yeah,
linear space. Third-dimensional beings can see linear time, you know? And so, you know, a dimension is a level of consciousness. So our consciousness that we have at our disposition can only perceive, a certain amount of conscious reality,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Right? But when we connect to a greater conscience or God, right? We can almost perceive their reality in the fourth or fifth or whatever
yeah.
dimension
Hardcore
they're in, the
meditators.
realm that they're in.
Yeah, like transcendental meditation, people get hardcore into that, say that they can almost feel like connected to that. That it's like hyper transcendental consciousness. And I think it was Walter Russell or someone who said that Jesus was achieved Christ consciousness. It's like he achieved the highest level of consciousness. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting. And then what was that other thing he said? They were like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." Or something. Oh yeah, he said, like when they asked him, "Well, where is heaven?" And he said, heaven is here, everywhere around you. And it's like, what does
Yeah.
that mean? It's like, what does that mean? Like, how, even metaphorically, right? But if we really are in a fourth dimension, then yeah, that we are engulfed and embedded in a fourth dimension. So it's every time is everywhere, right? I mean, you can't really say it's here or there. It's everywhere around us. And if God is outside the fourth dimension, then heaven is outside the fourth dimension. Then yeah, I mean, it's everywhere if you put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, like you were saying that in a near death experience, somebody said that the corner of a room when they were, I guess, transcending into that, the afterlife, the corner of a room started changing geometrically, right? To
Yeah,
shapes I'm sure that we haven't been able to
can't even
perceive,
understand, like
can
no.
never understand. Yeah. Like, and then they got ready and went to
Yeah,
to a different dimension,
yeah,
and it's like,
exactly.
how is it that, in their deathbed, or, in the hospital, wherever they were able to just easily go into a different dimension out of nowhere?
Actually happens or something happens. It's like your consciousness has to leave the three-dimensional body almost to even perceive something like that. And it's
Yeah.
fascinating because a lot of people on DMT trips, DMT, I don't know if you heard of it. DMT is like LSD, it's a hallucinogen. And they say it takes them to these higher levels of higher dimensions, or it pushes them to higher dimensions. Now that's a different thing because it's not the same as near death experience. As a matter of fact, it's not even close. But people still feel like they're going to a higher dimension, which I think that in itself is fascinating. Like, can this chemical make you somehow your consciousness transcend real? I don't know. But it's different from near death experiences because it doesn't have the same key elements and they're very inconsistent. All the DMT reports, very inconsistent. Near death experiences, the craziest thing about those is consistent across the board. Like thousands and thousands of ones that have been statistically analyzed, and many of them been these studies have been published in scientific journals and peer reviewed. Like this isn't just like books published by Christian authors. This is scientists, doctors publishing this stuff in scientific journals, and they peer reviewed and still approved them, despite having a what you would think would be a bias against it. But yeah, I wanted to add to that story that I told you about. You just mentioned the geometry changing in the corner of the room when they're having a near death experience. Like from what I remember, they said they couldn't even describe the geometric forms and changes that were happening. It was just beyond their comprehension. Like they can't describe it in human words. It's like, what does that even mean? And they say when
Yeah,
they get there, the colors are beyond anything of this earth. Like you can't even describe. There's not even a single combination of words that could describe the colors outside
dude,
of
it makes me
in a near
think
death experience. Crazy.
like, you know how God in the Bible said, he made us in his image and likeness, right? But
Mm.
what if that is not talking about our physical selves, but about our spiritual selves?
Yeah, like
Right?
something
He
else.
made us in his similar likeness to the point where we can perceive him. It's almost like I associate it to software developers. They create their code, or sometimes they create software, but it has a tint of them. I'm sure, like, right now, when we're gonna, like, in the next couple years, we're gonna see virtual reality. When we create our own characters, it's gonna have a touch of ourselves, right? We
Yeah,
always, when we create, with even when we have kids, we almost want to impose a little bit of ourselves in them, so that they carry something of us in them, right? And they know that they were ours, you know? And so I associate that with, the creation of humans, human beings, like the fact that it said he made us in his likeness, image and likeness, that even though in our human body we cannot perceive the fourth dimension or various dimensions, maybe our spiritual self can connect to those different dimensions, right?
yeah, yeah, right.
Maybe our spiritual self can connect to those different dimensions, which is which leaves a lot of good questions to ask, man. That's
That's fast. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. For a
No,
lot of people, it might seem like very, like, fairy tale like, or very,
well,
unrealistic.
yeah, if you only look at the surface of the Bible, that's how it's going to seem. But when you look, it seems like as if the deeper that I've dug and the more I've applied science to it to try to understand what it really means, the more I find it's more complicated than it seems. And it's actually gets farther away from that fairy tale mindset. It's like, oh, this is actually really interesting. I want to learn more about it. Um, the only thing I wanted to add about the near death thing was, like you mentioned earlier, 360 vision. So like their vision becomes more like less limited and more like 3D, like they can see more. They say they have telescopic vision, so and that would make sense, right? Like our vision is limited right now because we're in this,
Yeah.
but if you're
Yeah, we
outside the third
we can see
dimension,
dimensional.
you can telescopically see 3D objects because you're outside the third dimension. I mean,
Yeah, you can fly
that's
around with your vision. Yeah.
it's weird, right? And so maybe that's why they say their consciousness is like they're in a spherical thing of energy almost, and there's like this, they're encircled by this energy, and they can kind of see a form of their body, but it's not their it's like a body made of energy almost. And yeah, it's just so strange. Everything points to consciousness going to this higher dimension, like everything, especially the geometry changing in the room like that. That's that really is just crazy to me. It's just mind blowing. And if it was
Yeah.
just
It
one
makes
or
me
two
think
people,
of, like, Doctor Strange, when Doctor Strange goes into different dimensions,
that's a
like the
astral.
geometry of things just, like, starts
That might be
fixing
what they're
in so
getting
many different
inspiration.
ways.
That's probably what they're getting inspiration from is the theories of it. But yeah, like it'd be one thing if just one or two people talked about near death experiences, right? I'd be like, okay, whatever. But the fact that thousands of people have had not just near death experiences, but consistent across the board similar experiences that have common themes. I mean, that's just I don't know how to explain that. I really don't. But yeah, I mean, that's my, yeah, it's crazy, man.
Interesting. Yeah, I know we'll have a full podcast about just near death experiences.
Yeah, coming up
But
next. Yeah.
yeah, I guess we'll leave this will be our blooper, a little bit
We could
of a
just,
connection.
right, right. I mean, we can still put this as a podcast. We can just call it, I was saying we'll just call it like higher dimensions,
Afterthoughts or something.
relating higher dimensions to God or something. That's basically what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. I like it.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening in. We appreciate it. And yeah, hope you like this little afterthought conversation.